So, hey guys, we're here again in our our Serenity Book Club, so that we can discuss and continue to discuss this great book called Mirror Moments by our own Stephen Thurston. And we are so grateful for the opportunity for us to gather together and to talk about it. It's been a really good journey as we have been going from week to week to enjoy this book. Uh, Before we get into the discussion that we're going to go to today, anybody have anything that you all want to share from the last weeks? No? All right. Well, we're here together, gathering together today to talk about this particular book, and I'm so glad that we're here. So, with that in mind, let's go and get started. We are in chapter 11 of this book, and we find that it is Groundhog Day. You all remember the movie Groundhog Day, and all that means to that. So I'm hoping that we get a chance to talk about this Groundhog Day situation that we're dealing with even now. So Groundhog Day dating. I found that this was a really good perspective to look at and to understand that we oftentimes make the same mistakes again. I think we do that not only in relationships with men and women, but we also deal with it in relationships with friendships and what have you. And so he talks about groundhog dating, and he talks about, he goes through the whole process of talking about body chemistry and DNA and common ground and body odor and familiar face that tends to draw people together. But then he goes into a much more collective process of saying about history. And so that's kind of where I wanted us to start today, is to talk about the characteristics that allow you to accept or reject a person in your life. What are your thoughts regarding that? Anyone, you all can just jump in. And those of you on Facebook, you guys can also jump in too. Let me just read a little section of that so that you can see it. The characteristics that you reprise or the reject as either parent, the things that are temper, overbearing, addiction, etc., are the ones that you're most likely going to find in a partner that you select, that give you a sense of recognition. And so, in other words, that we tend to draw close to people who are just pretty much like, our parents were. What were your thoughts on that? Do you all agree with that? You disagree with that? Is that a habit that you've seen? What?
Um, I kind of disagree with that.
Okay.
I didn't notice. I wasn't brought up with my father, so when it came for me to actually pick a mate, um, I couldn't. I didn't choose from my father. Actually, I was trying to choose the opposite of what my mother had went through, the men in her life. Um, I can probably say my choice was probably based on an ideal of what you read about, okay? Not so much of what was in my life. Um, and it's just kind of strange because when you don't have positive role models in your life, you don't know, how to pick. So you're just going off of what you've seen on TV or what you read.
Okay. That's kind of the fantasy kind of thing.
Yes, exactly.
Anyone
Exactly.
else want to share here or Facebook? Hey, Glenda, we're glad that you're on. We're glad that Marianne, you're here, and Trina as well. Glad that you guys are here joining us. Well, I think that you might find that there are people that you kind of draw to because of familiarity. I think that that's what he was talking about. He goes on and says that it's crazy as it sounds that the familiarity can become a powerful aphrodisiac, turning you to what you loathe into what you seemingly love.
Mm,
And Glenda says that she agrees with that. And so, welcome, Erica. We're glad to have you this afternoon as well. One of the things that we know for sure is that there is a tendency for people to deal with familiar things. Um, we tend to gravitate toward people who are much like us or like the things that we were around in terms of friendships, and oftentimes even in relationships, male female, spouses, husbands, wives, those kinds of things, we gravitate to the people who are familiar in our family. Probably what Carol, she was talking about, the exception for her is that she didn't seem to draw close to the people who were like her. She would actually draw closer to people who were much, much more in her fantasy. But
yeah.
recognition is something that we often we take for granted. Is that characteristic or that connection that you feel that seems to be super important to you yourself. He goes on saying that the question that you're probably pondering at this point, he says, Stephen, if I'm guilty of serial dating the same kind of people, where we nicely fit a negative baggage into one another, underdeveloped um, emotional compartments. How do I break this groundhog scenario? And I found out, if you're familiar with the movie Groundhog, you see that each time this guy wakes up every morning, it's the same day over and over again. And no matter how many times he tries to change the ingredients of the day, the familiarity comes right back to that. And so I think we pick people in our lives who are very familiar with the things that we had before, and we don't even realize that we recognize it. Even in poisonous friendships, you find that you wind up hanging out with almost the same kind of people that you were hanging out with before, that you had to break camps for that. And so we have to learn how to undo this history that we have with one another. So those of you who are on Facebook and those of you who are here, if you all want to jump in, if you disagree or there's something else that you all want to add to this section on history in terms of the groundhog dating or friendships. All right, well, then we're going to move on. He goes on and talks about that there is some questions that you have to give some practical principles to apply. That if you found yourself getting right back into the same scenario with friends, with relationships, and you keep doing the same thing, Groundhog Day, over and over again, this is the first thing that we need to do, is to learn how to forgive ourselves, to realize
Yeah.
that we played a great part in how the damage has been done in that relationship, and how we can say, forgive me for being where I am. Let me go on and try to change this scenario. Do you find that people tend to do that less or more in terms of getting out of this cycle? Or do we even know how to forgive ourselves
Mm.
making those mistakes? Either question.
I agree with your second question. Do we know how to forgive ourselves? You know, even though we ask God to forgive us, but then we go in our mind and we rehearse the things that we keep doing and asking ourselves why I did that. I mean, it's like like the groundhouse. You just keep going back and forth over it and not getting on with your life. You
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, I think that that's true. We also talked about how you have to learn, and he says here on page 56, he says, analyze the problem. The next step is to pinpoint the traits, the characteristics, and the symptoms, knowing where the patterns come from and how they're created and finding ways to break them. He goes on by saying that what do all your relationships have in common? Have you ever thought about what all your relationships have in common? Because sometimes what we'll wind up doing is we think that that somehow the only common denominator is us, and that's not necessarily true because we're in all those relationships and all those friendships. But really, what is the common thing that all these relationships have that tend to go badly? And then what are the warning signs have you missed or ignored? What is it that you're continuing to miss and ignore, that you keep cycling in this same thing over and over again? And like I said, whether or not it's friendships or relationships, is this something that we have still seen and we wound up seeing, but we don't make those changes? What is that? And then what behaviors have these relationships brought out in you? So if we're not recognizing what's happening, then we can't do anything about it. What are your thoughts on that, guys? And those of you on Facebook, you guys can chime in too.
I
Hi, can you
agree
hear
with
me?
you. Who? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Estella. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. I was just saying that I agree with everything they're saying, and also picking up on I sort of make the same mistakes over and over again. I'm like the Groundhog Day. And so what I did, I sort of withdraw a little bit and trying to learn myself. And in other words, what is it within me that's attracting the same type of people? And I try to get out the victim mentality and try to pray on and ask God, what is it in me? Or what am I lacking that I allow this to keep happening over and over again? And like you said, it's the hardest thing to forgive yourself.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
Thank
part
you.
of, yeah, go on. Yeah, it's a part of analyzing ourselves and finding out who we are. Um, Erica from Facebook says, will it go round in circles, in her Billy Preston voice? That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, we tend to go around in this circle of constantly trying to do that. But if we take the time to analyze the problem, because the problem is not always us, because sometimes we'll own that. Even as victims, we'll own it. And we're like, well, maybe it was me. Well, maybe it's not you, but maybe it's how we think about all these relationships. And you think about it, you start analyzing, what did all these relationships have in common? How unhealthy were all these relationships? Number two, what are the warning signs that I just miss or ignore? Because I think that that's the key, is that sometimes we don't miss the warning signs. Sometimes we just simply ignore them. We just ignore them, like, okay, that's just going to go away. Or, we're trying to give the benefit of the doubt. That's a flaw in that person's character. I'm going to forgive it and move on, and not realizing how toxic that can be for your own self. And then what behaviors have this relationship brought out in you? Have you changed? Did you modify your behavior? Is there something that creates within you a change? You have to ask yourself that. And then what emotions trigger in you? Because if we don't begin to recognize that, then we're going to always have unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friendships, unhealthy marriages. It's just going to happen by that virtue. If anybody wants to jump in there before we move on to the next section on page 57.
I want to also, I don't know whether he said it in his book. I know Reverend Thurston, I know he have said it in some of his sermons. We tend to, people that's not good in our life, toxic relationships or whatever, we tend to attract the same type of person, and it's almost and I had to go back and look at myself and see, why am I attracting this type of person? And, like you said, you have to go back and self-analyze and see what it is that's what's happening within you. And then you have to change it from within. And see, I know that was Reverend Thurston, because he's always talking about changing what within to change what's around.
Yeah, and even in this chapter, he has talked extensively about that in terms
Yeah.
of the things that do attract us, that body chemistry, the DNA, the common ground, the
Okay,
body odor,
yes.
the familiar face, all of that. And then he's continuing to talk about that in terms of our history, but also understanding that once you recognize that and you've done that, then we've got to learn how to forgive ourselves. We have to learn how to analyze the problem so that we don't continue to repeat that. And then he goes on and says, take a chance. Now that you have consciously chosen to be open to the possibility of being with someone different than you typically choose, how is that comfort level? He says, dating deja vu is about comfort. You know your way around it and it's more attractive. And so dating someone outside of your norm is unattractive because you can't control that. You can't be in charge of that. Vivian from Facebook says, we need to stop trying to please and forgive one another, and please and be confident in ourselves and trust and ask God for help and wisdom. That is so true.
Yes.
So we have to take the chance, as Vivian is saying clearly, to do something different, to be something different, to trust God even in something new. So I may not hang out with the same people, I may not date the same people, I may not, I have to learn how to take a chance and stop sticking with the same type. He says we often stick with the same type because we're scared something new may work. I just thought that was deep. What did you all think about that, here on Facebook, and those of you here? What did you all think about that? That we're scared that something may work?
I think what's happening there is that we kind of lazy and set in our way. And when you got something new, you got to work at it. And when you got to work at it, it's hard to keep on trying to work at it. And that's why we don't think it'll work, because we have to put more in than what we do if we just stay in the position that we're in. If we just stay lazy with the same kind of people, every day we get up, then we know what we're going to recognize. We know what we're going to deal with. But then when you get somebody new that pushes you to do something different, you got to work at it. And a lot of times we don't want to work at it.
That's a good point. That is such a good point, because it is hard. It is hard to get a new group of friends. It is hard to deal with a different type of relationship, because at least if I know this type of person and this type of behavior, I know how to handle it. But something new is going to cause us to work harder. It's almost like the reason why a person will complain about being on a job and never try to go to another job, is because at least I'm familiar with this
Yes.
mess. I don't know what this unknown is going to do. I know, at least with these toxic friends, I know what I'm going to expect. But another group of friends, I don't know what I'm going to deal with. I at least know this person that I'm with right now. I know them. I don't know what's out there. So yeah, it's all of that. I think it's a level of lazy, but also just a level of fear. And then he goes on and says, in that, completing that paragraph, he says, it's true, many people are literally afraid of success, living in fear that they don't deserve a better relationship, that has caused us to tolerate things that we should not have. What are your thoughts about that, guys?
What page are you on?
Page 57.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Take a chance. Yeah. He goes on talking about living in fear. You don't deserve a better relationship has caused you to tolerate things that you should not have. And Vivian from Facebook says sometimes we just go along because we don't want confrontation. Good point, Vivian. Absolutely. And by the way, happy belated birthday to you, woman of God. So we have a lot of things that we're just dealing with that is just not from taking a chance. We just won't take a chance. We won't take a chance to get a new job. We won't take a chance to deal with a new friendship. We won't take a chance of dealing with another relationship because we're used to the familiar. He goes on and says, ignore your negative nature. Ignore your your negative nature. He goes on by explaining that. He says, once you decide to step out of your comfort zone and test drive a new type, be aware that negative self-talk will raise its voice, and you're going to disregard the inner voice that predicts a negative outcome for your new type. Recognize that it's an old dialogue scripted in your past, trying to play out in your presence. The goal of negative self talk is to maintain a comfortable and familiar yet toxic relational environment. I think that we have some self talk because of the hurts, the pains, the history, the stuff that we've dealt with in the past, and then what the enemy and ourselves, because we can't blame it all on the enemy and ourselves will continue to replay these tapes that says that this new type, oh, it's too good. Oh, it's this friendship's going too well, or this relationship is going too well. There's something wrong here. And so going back to chapters 10 and 9, you just start picking it apart. You start picking apart all of these other things that make you not accept where you are, or this different type of person. Erica from Facebook says that brings us back to the fear of a couple of weeks ago. That's funny. Yeah, it does. It does. It goes back to that fear because we are fearful of letting go of the things that are familiar with us to try something different. And then we talk ourselves out of something that could be happy or healthy because we're not familiar with that. Anybody else want to say anything before we go to the next section or the next chapter? All right. Well,
I
chapter.
would like to say something.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say I've always been like that, and that the old tapes play in my head. I've always been heavy from childhood on, and sometimes my clothes didn't look the way, or my shoes didn't look the way certain people did, and I was talked about and bullied, and now even as an adult, sometimes I close myself out or won't go places because I feel like I don't have the right clothes, right shoes, or so our tapes are playing in my head.
Yeah, sometimes our own negative background will cause us to think that we're not worthy, that we're not worth it, that, of course, because we're not like, this person over here who is well dressed or maybe thin, or on the other hand, when people are thin, who think that people who are a little thicker, we always want something that we're not. We always do. And we think that someone or that grass is always greener on the other side, and realizing that they're just hoping the same thing that you are. They wish that they were this and that as well. And so those negative things will come in our head. From Facebook, Erica says, I have a confession. It's hard for me to get to know the new guy because when I look at them or talk to them, I keep hearing the old guy in my head. Amen. That is so true, because oftentimes when people have told you things, even as growing up as children, if someone's told you you'll never amount to anything, you'll never be anything, if you've been bullied, like to Estella's point, that, you're this or that, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too, ugly, I remember from Color Purple, ooh, you get to that point where you hear these negative things in your head and you're like, no, 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 that's not who I am. That's not what I am. That's not who God made me. God made me perfect. He made me great in his power. And sometimes we allow those tapes to play for ourselves even more than the enemy does. The enemy, according to Revelation, comes to set aside and be an accuser of the brother and accusing us day and night. But we're worse than sometimes the enemy himself. He's like, I'll just step back. You got enough stuff playing in your head. I don't need to even bother with a demon on your part. So we've got to learn how to undo those tapes. Good discussion, good input. The next chapter is on unsafe people. Unsafe people. And unsafe people, he starts talking about our patterns of bad relationships are often blamed on the other person. It's always these issues, their shortcomings, they're missing the mark. When a person has a pattern of being hurt by relationships, it's usually not by chance. The weight of the blame may not be so much about the other person, but more of a sign of your own emotional and spiritual immaturity. What were your thoughts as he opened up that particular chapter in that way, based upon the things that we have been reading before?
I'm going to say he hit it on the point for me. It's usually more of my emotional and spiritual immaturity when we in my relationship. He just hit it on the point. It kind of hurt, but he hit it on the point.
Yeah, I thought it was true. He starts on page 60 talking about that we have a fear of being alone. And he asked this question, first of all, do you like yourself? So those of you here and those of you who are on Facebook, you don't have to confess it. You don't have to say it out loud, but ask yourself the question, do you like yourself? The thing I discovered during this whole pandemic is that I really don't appreciate my own company all that much. That's why I'm always searching to be around other people, because as extroverts, oftentimes we're sucking up other people's energy, just being around them. And I realized in this pandemic, I don't know if I like myself, but I really don't like my company. And so we've got to learn to ask ourselves this very serious question: do I like myself, or am I in such fear of being alone that I will tolerate toxic friendships and toxic relationships just so that I won't be alone? There are people in this pandemic who have either made a decision to divorce, and there is a whole bunch of people who made a decision to get married, and you don't know which, why, or how things are happening, but this pandemic has done a lot of stuff to people. So what are your thoughts about that? When you think about it, do you maintain an unsafe relationship just so that you don't have to be alone? What are your answers
The
regarding?
opposite of you. I'm an introvert.
Okay.
I love being alone. I love
Okay.
myself. I love my company. So I don't have that problem.
Mhm.
It doesn't bother me. I could sit here all day, do things myself by myself. And I actually like that time by myself. Somebody call and interrupt me sometime. I get, why they calling now? Okay. But I was just having fun with myself. So it's a different, whether you're an introvert or extrovert, I think. Because
Well,
I want,
Carolyn Vivian agrees with you on Facebook. She says that she enjoys her own company as well,
yes.
and she can keep herself. I'll throw in the word thoroughly entertained because she says she can keep herself entertained. And Glenda says she don't mind being alone either. But the fear of being alone oftentimes drives people to make poor choices and connect with people. He says that we'll even select individuals who are unable to connect, people who are married, people who are already involved, people who are emotionally unavailable to avoid spending time alone with ourselves. Yeah. Erica says, get out of my business. That's funny. But one of the things that he goes on and he talks about is that character carelessness. When choosing a partner, character isn't a key component. It isn't a key component because our hearts are disconnected from the values that we end up in a relationship with individuals whose inner sickness matches our inner sickness. I thought, wow, that sometimes we develop friendships and relationships with people who have an inner sickness and we have an inner sickness. And so we're both not going to the doctor together. What are your things? What are your thoughts about that? Have you all found yourself connecting at any point, whether or not it's in a friendship or relationship with someone who is innerly sick, just like you, or just as needful, or just as sick on the inside? And I know that that's a harsh word to say, sick, but there is a sickness in toxicity of relationships. So what are your thoughts, guys? And those of you on Facebook can chime in too.
Um, I'm going to answer that question, but I want to go back to the question you asked before about do you like yourself being alone? And I must say, I agree with everybody. I have learned how to like myself being alone, but there are times when I do need to get out and see other people. So I can be a little bit of both, but I can enjoy being by myself. And because I can enjoy being by myself and I've been in toxic relationships, I'm very careful about who I let come too close to me. If I see the red flags, I'm going to get away from that because I have found peace, and it took me a long time to get to this point, and I don't want anything to interrupt that. You know what I'm saying? Because it feels good not to worry about what somebody else is saying or thinking and getting your feelings too close. So I have I guess you call it a boundary line. I think that's what you might call it for me.
Okay. Yeah, and I think everybody should have some boundaries. You know, but one of the things that we can clearly see, and Erica says the spirits are catchy. They are. He goes on and says that he said our demons know each other, and they become the tie that binds us. Uh, our demons know each other, so it's almost like my poor demon catches up with your poor demon and like, okay, let's hang out together. And so we have to concern ourselves to make sure that we don't find ourselves in that place. Did you want to say something, Estella?
I did. I'm a person that, and I don't. I won't say I don't like myself. I just don't like my company, and I'm learning to accept myself. and no matter what, God made me, and He doesn't make junk. And also, I've been in a lot of toxic situations, and I had to learn how to put up boundaries. And even in relationships, like even with people you can't be apart from, like family members, friends, you know, I had to. Sometimes they trigger those old tapes, and I have to put up boundaries. And sometimes I have to leave them alone for a while until I can regroup I and sometimes I have to remember to always put on my armor. And then sometimes somebody can say something or do something, and I'll go back to my childhood, and I'm like, now what's that about, God? You know. And so what I've done, I put myself out of the market. I mean, as far as dating and anything about, but as far as friendships, I try to be friendly, but if I see that it's toxic, I pray about it. I say, Lord, am I in the right relationship with this friend? Or, you know, what is my part in this? Do you have me in here for a lesson?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's where
yeah,
I'm at.
absolutely. Sometimes we find ourselves in these constant toxic relationships, and we've got to be very, very careful of how we're dealing with that. He goes on and says that there's also another thing that oftentimes we don't think about. It's called the Messiah mindset. I'm going back to Facebook real quickly. It says, Erica says, we have to make a strategic an intentional plan to control our environment and create the environment we want. Amen to that. Amen to that. I totally agree with that. But the next section is the Messiah mindset. He says that we pick people who can't meet our needs because they are so needy. Then he goes on and says the connection is we don't develop isn't a mature connection, but it's rather a rescuing connection. Our consistent pursuit to fix them feeds our ego more than importantly gives us the excuse of avoiding fixing what's broken within us. A rescuer always needs an unsafe person to rescue because without that, they feel that they bring no value to the relationship. Now, I thought that was specifically interesting when you were looking at that. So I want you all to talk a little bit about that. What are your thoughts on that? Yes, Mrs. Stella, I hear you.
I'll speak first. He hit it on the head. He hit it on the head because I've been accused of the Messiah mindset, you know, always trying to find people or friends that I can fix or help, you know, and not really dealing with what's inside of me. And then seem like when they get back on their feet, they're gone. And then I'm like, wow, woe is me. But I'm not the victim. You know, I allowed that situation to happen. And I am so glad he wrote about that. I was like, oh Lord, I need some more work in me.
Well, it is definitely something that we can struggle with if we're not careful, and particularly for people who are people pleasers or those who like to fix people. Um, and we do it in the name of the Lord oftentimes, well, I'm gonna do this great ministry. I'm gonna help this person out. I'm gonna, and not realizing that you are just in the middle of a toxic relationship and the need to fix stuff. And so then that's why they become your DIY project. They become the person that you're going to repair and restore and fix. It's like watching HGTV on a regular basis, where you're just trying to fix this person and fix that person and make this person well and that person well. And oftentimes we become sicker in the process. So very good. Thank you so much for your input and what you were sharing. As we go a little further, he talks about familiarity. He says in his role in pastoral leadership for decades, that he's encountered countless individuals who proclaim and profess that they desire different, better, and more, but they always wind up doing the same. We got from Facebook, Vivian says that sometimes we pick needy people to help and think if we're becoming indispensable to them that they won't be able to survive without us. Ooh, I think we need to pass the plate for Miss Vivian today. She's throwing it down, boy. I'm telling you, that is so true. That we feel like, okay, oftentimes when a relationship ends and that person leaves, I was indispensable to you. How did you dispense of me? How does that happen? I did this for you. I built that for you. I did all those things for you. And then all of a sudden we feel like, okay, well, this is really something wrong because I sacrificed. You've heard those words. You might not have said it, but you may have heard those words with someone else. So, yeah, good point, Miss Vivian. He goes on, talks about that familiarity is what causes us to not make something different. Is we're so familiar with the past that we don't want something different. And then he goes on to talk about merger wishes. Merger wishes. This is on the bottom of page 61. And he goes on and says that this psychological term associated with us trying to make up for the things that we may lack by merging our identity with our partners, their image, money, popularity, social status, etc., are all things we desire but feel we can't achieve. These superficial things become ours by the way of our connection to our partner. This merger mentality can blind us to the toxic flaws of our partner and keeps us from doing the work of achieving goals on our own. Wow. What were your thoughts on that, guys? Miss Carolyn, I see it on your face. No? You don't want to say it? Okay. Well, what I will do is I'll say it for us. So there are times in which we are drawn to people because they are what we want to be. And so, in what we want to be, we're attracted to that. Maybe it's a confidence level that they have. Maybe it's some arrogance that you kind of wish that you had. Maybe it was something about their personality, the way that they handle things. I want to handle things that way. Or it's something, a stability issue in relationships. Sometimes, if that person makes more money or they've had a good job or what have you, sometimes you're drawn closer to that because, like, I'm feeling this security thing. And so we eliminate people who might be good for our lives because we want that person to make up for us in our lives, however that might be. And so as a result of that, we wind up being in these toxic relationships. So any thoughts from you guys before we do that? Because we're at the end of this chapter, and I just think that this has been a good time of discussion. What are your thoughts? Any other things that you all want to input before we close for today?
I just, at the end of the uh, paragraph on page 61, it says, to break habit pattern, it take work, and we don't want to do the work. I think that's for most of us. We just get so used to what we're doing that we just don't want to venture out into anything different.
Mhm.
Like a couple people said today, because it will take work, which we do not want to put in, and we could keep going our life the way it is, even though we don't like it. We rather just settle for what we're familiar with than for to change it. So I mean, I really just that's right there. It really stuck with me, and that's what I've had to focus on a lot. It's going to take work and to do the changes I need to change and to flip around some of the relationships I have that's not working.
Yeah.
Well, I really have to go back and reread some of these chapters because it's speaking to me in more ways than one. But I must say, this pandemic has made me more aware of me. And I appreciate the time. It's a good time and a bad time. And it's really hard for some people. But this time right now, it's a time for me to really, like a self-discovery, okay, within me. Because you really can't get into a relationship right now. I mean, you might be able to talk over the phone and all that, but right now I don't know whether I'm scared, but I know that I can prepare myself for when things do open up. So I can understand what he's saying, and it kind of makes you look back at you and kind of self-analyze. And okay, when it's time for me to get out there, am I going to be scared? I mean, am I going to take a chance?
Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying. Vivian from Facebook says that we get so caught up in them, talking about these toxic people, we
Mm-hmm.
forget what we want and need. And so I think that
Yes.
you're speaking to that, Carol, is really identifying what is it that you need? What is it
Mm-hmm.
that you need in these friendships? To Mrs. Stella's point, what do you need in these relationships? To these other points, what is it that you need to make sure that you connect with the right people, the
Right.
healthy people, the people who are really going to be your champion rather than your anchor? Do you
Yeah.
find yourself in a Titanic situation, going down with the ship like the captain because that's the thing to do, that's what you do? Because the captain always went down with the ship. I thought that was a stupid mindset, but I understand. You go down with your ship, so everybody drowns and you drown because your ship is going down. How do we find ourselves to get out of these drowning Titanic friendships, drowning Titanic
Yeah.
relationships? How do we keep ourselves out of that? Is by making sure that you get on and strap on, what you need in terms of the life preserver, and you get in that boat.
Yeah.
You get in that boat,
Yeah.
you get to shore, and then you find someone who's safe on shore. That's what we do. So that's it for Serenity Book Club. Next week, we will be finishing this book. We have had a great opportunity to deal with this book, and this has been a lovely time. What we'll do is we'll probably have like a week's break in between. Next week, we'll talk about the book that we're going to be going to next. I think the book that we were going to go next, we probably need to start after the first of the year because
Yeah.
it's a much longer book. But I'm
Yes.
going to challenge us, and we're going to get us a small book for us to read in between. But I'm so excited about what we have learned and grown out to do today. And those of you on Facebook, we're so glad for your participation. Those of you here in Zoom, we are glad for your participation. Thanks for joining us, Martha. Thank you for joining us, Nita, Estella, Carol, and Carolyn. We love you so much. Have a
Okay.
great day. Say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
I enjoyed it my first time.
Love you. Enjoy
Oh.
you. Enjoyed your message last night, Pastor Yvette.
God bless you. Thank you.